Fear is something which we all experience, the young and the old, the new and experienced. From the janitor to the CEO within a company, everyone on this planet holds fears within about something or someone, which is precisely what we'll be examining on the show today. Hello everyone, my name is Austin Ventura. On behalf of the IUK HRSA organization, we would like to welcome you to the second installment of our Storytime series in the Business and Leadership Podcast. Joining us on the show today is Gabby VanAlstine. As the former Director of Human Resources for IUK and the current leader of HRSA organization here on campus, no one truly understands people more than she. She will be helping us today to tackle this often unavoided subject, and not only how to deal with it, but even embrace it. So welcome, Gabby, to the show today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Austin.
Oh, it's certainly a pleasure having you. Now, to start off, could you please provide our audience with an insight into your personal career path and history?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. So I went to college at a small liberal arts school near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I didn't know truly what I wanted to do yet. I always enjoyed books and reading, and then I also really enjoyed teaching. I would volunteer as a teacher for Sunday school and everything like that. So I chose the major of English and elementary education in college, had a wonderful experience in college, met some of the best friends of my life. After college, I moved for personal reasons out to Indiana, and I was waiting tables, like I think everyone has to do once in their life at least. And I started thinking, I want to do something with my career. I'm not quite sure what that'll be. So I applied to some teaching roles, but also applied to a job that was called Human Resources Coordinator. And I had no idea what that meant. I actually had to go to yahoo.com because this was before Google was widely accepted in a verb. And I went to yahoo.com the night before my interview and I typed in, what is human resources? And I went to the interview. I landed the job. I took it. It sounded interesting. They said there'd be some training. It's a high growth organization. And I'd say probably within about 6 months, I fell in love with human resources and said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I stayed at Employment Plus, which was a staffing firm. We had about 10,000 temporary associates in the field, but I was a part of the internal corporate human resources department. I was the second hire in the HR department. And I was about employee number 64 when I was hired. I stayed there for 5 years. I left. I was one of 275 by the time I left. So a lot of growth. We grew from 3 states when I was hired to 17 states of operation. Super fun. Moved over to Rickers, which is a chain of convenience stores and gas stations in central Indiana area and Fort Wayne. And I was assistant director of HR there and had a wonderful mentor there that really helped me grow in my career and in human resources, developed some cool training programs, and served as number 2 for HR for about 500 cashiers in all of our stores, about 50 managers, and about 50 corporate staff. So really expanded my love of HR there and enrolled in IUK Kokomo for my MBA. From Rickers, I decided it was time for a change, and I really wanted to work high growth stage company again, and I was really interested in the tech space, so I started talking to a company called One Click Ventures, which was e-commerce, a lot of different brands of e-commerce when I started, and they were making a pivot to just eyewear. So I moved over to One Click Ventures as Director of Talent and Culture, and I really expanded my cultural and organizational development skill set there. So built some programs to help us improve the culture, did a lot of professional development, and it was the first time I was really responsible for the entire HR function. So that was pretty cool. From One Click Ventures, I went to IUK Kokomo as the HR director. I had a wonderful team of 3 people by the time I left and some fabulous interns throughout the time I was here. And that was really interesting because I moved from a really small startup type company in the tech space to a really large, highly matrixed organization with IU. So learning about all of the policies and all of the procedures and really sharpened my ability to be strategic because you couldn't just implement things as you wanted. You had to kind of, work with the entire system. So I served in that capacity. I loved it for about 3 years, at which time I was adjuncting. And I was teaching organizational behavior, And I started thinking, I love this. I love this so very much. What could be more powerful other than working in HR is teaching future HR leaders. And so a position opened up for full-time lecturer, and I took the chance, very fearful, as we'll talk about today, to teach full-time, and I've absolutely enjoyed it. So it's been a wild ride, and definitely not a linear career path for me, but every turn, every pivot has been fun.
Yeah, certainly sounds like you've had a very well-rounded career in many different industries and aspects of business, which certainly is nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Definitely a lot of industries and and a lot of great experiences and all connected to human resources. So I love that.
That's awesome. Now, with us being on the topic of fear today, we wanted to ask you, what is your personal definition of fear? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I believe that fear is obviously being concerned, being worried about things, but mostly because you don't know more about them. So I think fear plagues us all, but I would say probably 90% of fear is really uncertainty. And I think that is, in some strange way, comforting for me, because once you accept that it is uncertainty, you kind of build your mindset around accepting, okay, I'm going to find out as much as I possibly can. I'm going to learn and grow, and fear lessens into comfort, into knowing what you're doing, and to rocking it. Mm-hmm. So that's my personal definition of fear, really just uncertainty.
Yeah, very good. So essentially like outer space to you. It's like the sphere is like space to us. We see it, but yet we don't know much about it.
Yeah, we never know what we don't know, right? And as human beings, we're creatures of habit, right? Mm-hmm. We look for comfort. We look for familiarity. There's brain science that indicates, right, that, when we find things that are comfortable to us, when we hear voices that are familiar, our brains light up in a certain way, right? That's how, humans, dogs, everyone, it's the same. So I think when you don't know, when you lose that certainty, when you lose that familiarity, that's when fear happens. And really, just knowing, hey, this is uncomfortable because it's not familiar is a great space to be in, because when you recognize, I'll learn, I'll find comfort in it, right? I'll explore the unknown. And then two is really just, embracing that whenever I'm uncomfortable, it means I'm growing. And that's what I've told myself, personally for my entire life. I'm uncomfortable right now, but it means I'm growing. So to me, fear is just discomfort and uncertainty.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, what was a fear that you had held previously in career? When you first started out, were there things, obviously the unknowns and uncertainties that you had experienced when you first started off in the human resources world? These fears that you held previously, how did you eventually learn to conquer that certain fear?
Yes. So this is a great question, and I think this can be very relatable to a lot of our student population and a lot of students and recent graduates entering the career field. One of the biggest fears I had, like I had mentioned, I didn't even know what human resources was. I was an English major, no business education. Mm-hmm. So the night before, I Yahoo'd it. I wonder if we used Google as a verb back then. I don't think so. I went and I searched what it was. And every new role I have entered, which I've had a lot of them for 14 years of work experience, I've really changed the direction of my career. I've changed industries a lot of times. My biggest fear was always, I'm going to go into this job and not know anything. I won't know anything. And then it just started happening in time, I would say, probably at my first job, and each additional switch that I have made, I like to call it pivot, by the way, because I don't view careers as a ladder, I view them as a jungle gym. So each pivot that I've made on my jungle gym, I've realized no one knows all the answers, but it takes a special person that knows how to find them. And I've always just figured it out. If I didn't know, I read voraciously. I research incredulously. I ask questions of my network. I just try to find the answer. I ask anyone and everyone that will listen, and I find the answer, and I figure it out. So my biggest fear was not knowing anything. And what I've realized is everyone's in that same position. You just need to know how to figure it out. You need to be scrappy and smart.
And that certainly comes with having the passion for what you do and what you're trying to figure out, because a lot of people, when they don't know the answers to something, it's often a common practice to simply just give up or to quit on it. But it seems like you, with your love of human resources, you simply found that happy medium in finding the answers because you loved it so much.
Absolutely. Like it was like a challenge for me. Mm-hmm. And again, it kind of goes back to that fear thing. It's like, I don't know how to solve this problem I'm having at work, so I'm moderately uncomfortable. If you change your mindset to view it as a challenge, right? I will find this answer. I'm going to friggin' figure this out if it's the life or death, right? You figure it out, and then you realize, wow, I learned so much by doing that. So it's that growth that comes from that discomfort. But yeah, I've had some situations where I had no idea what to do. And, it's also why it's really important to develop a good network, have some mentors, and then just, problem solving is one of the most important competencies I think anyone on earth can demonstrate, can develop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Now, many students in the School of Business at IUK will be or are currently experiencing changes, myself included, starting new internships or even starting their careers, or even for some other people, who are higher up, they might be starting a completely new industry or new role within their company. Obviously that uncertainty that we've been speaking of. How would you advise these students or people to embrace their fears of being that new guy in the workplace?
Yeah, well, so certainly being the new guy or gal, right? That's always a very uncomfortable position to be in. You feel downright, I don't know, like a dork, like, and maybe, a rookie running back in the NFL where everything is moving so fast, right? And you're there like running in molasses. That's how being the new person feels. And so, obviously, and I'll say it for every question, but one, the mindset, learning to embrace it. This is a challenge. I'm uncomfortable. It means I'm growing. Number one. Number two, at any organization I've ever been on, when I first start, I view my first maybe 30 days, maybe even longer, it depends on the role, but almost think of it as a listening tour. So I try to make partnerships, connections, relationships with people that will be some of my, I want to say, most frequent collaborators, most frequent partners in that role. Mm-hmm. And I meet them, schedule time to meet with them, talk to them about their pain points, talk to them about how I could ideally help them, right? And try to understand the challenges that they face, try to understand what the organization's doing. I think that, and you learn so much. You learn so much by talking to, anyone. Organizations all have onboarding, but they're hopefully. As HR, I say hopefully. But, you'll never find out more than actually talking to the people that work there. So I kind of view, and I would advise everyone to view it as a listening tour. Try to learn as much as you possibly can about your colleagues, the challenges they face. Try to learn as much as you possibly can about your supervisor and what issues and problems you can solve for him or her. Try to learn as much as you possibly can about the company. Where was it founded? What's the biggest risk? Try to get a general SWOT analysis for the company. What could put us out of business tomorrow? Who are our biggest competitors? What are the challenges we face? What's our 2, 5, 10-year strategy? Where are we going? Try to learn about the leadership. So I'd say trying to settle in, learn as much as you possibly can about company, partners, the industry, generally will help kind of ease you and make you feel more confident. Remember that you aren't expected in most roles to contribute immediately on day one, right? Because that would be foolhardy, because you could contribute something that's not a good fit because you don't know the company. You don't know what you don't know. So think about it as an opportunity to really learn and soak it in and become an expert there. In addition, I cannot say this enough, I teach HR, but I also teach career development. having a strong network and mentors. So when I transitioned to Rickers, I had never worked in the C-store, which is convenience store space, before. So I, obviously found a great mentor in my immediate supervisor, but she connected me with other C-store directors, assistant directors, safety managers, because I was in charge of safety and general liability. And I would reach out to these people with questions. Email is a beautiful thing, right? Have you ever encountered this? What did you do in this case? I asked them all of the time. I went to trainings and, they would have events where you could go to and actually meet these people face to face. So definitely do that. And then when I transitioned to OneClick, I'd never worked in the tech space and e-com. So I leaned on my supervisor to help me make connections. I made some wonderful connections that I'm still connected with to this day that helped me think through problems, that helped me get adjusted, that recommended great books that I read that have helped my career. So, build a network, gain some mentors that are within that industry or within that role that can really benefit you and that you can ask questions to help you figure that stuff out. I would say those would be, my two biggest pieces of advice. And then just get comfortable in what you don't know. I think I've shared with my students before, my first day at OneClick, it was this beautiful building, and everything was decorated all fresh and neat and funky, and they took me on a tour on my first day, and they said, "Gabby, do you want a glass of water?" And I said, "Sure." And the glasses were under the sink. So I grabbed a glass, and I thought, wow, this is a really cool glass. This place is so cool that even their glasses are cool. So I filled it up with water, walked around the building. The very last person I met said, "It's nice to meet you, Gabby." I said, "Nice to meet you too." He said, "Why the heck are you drinking out of a vase?" And so obviously I knew nothing about the company. That was hilarious and moderately uncomfortable. If I had any shame gland, I probably would have been embarrassed, but definitely, filling that role of the awkward new gal. But I tell you what, it's a great story that I still remember to this day, and some of my colleagues there still remember. So just embrace it. Hey, I'm new here. Help me. Hey, I'm the newbie. I know nothing. At Google, they call the newbies nooglers instead of Googlers. And they actually wear hats so that other people can see that they're new and kind of will be more than likely to help them out. Sorry, Google. My phone picked up that I just said Google, and it wanted to help me. Google Assistant. Google's so helpful.
Yeah, it sounds like to me that you would certainly advise leaning on your connections and establishing that network of people that you can constantly rely on for advice, tools, whatever it might be. It seems like that connection is absolutely not only necessary but vital in your success, because eventually, you can't really do everything on your own, obviously.
No man is an island. That's exactly right. Yeah, establish that network, listen and soak in and learn as much as you can before you start, spouting off ideas and, trying to contribute in ways that may waste your time. And then just embrace the newness and ask your colleagues for help. Let them know, I'm the awkward newbie. This is what I need right now. Sorry, I don't know. I will know. Mm-hmm. And try to remember, this awkwardness, this new feeling will pass. And soon you'll be a superstar that's contributing meaningfully, and you'll have the opportunity to welcome someone else new. And you're going to feel really good about that.
Yep. It's often said that anything doing worthwhile is very difficult. If there's no challenge to it, then it's really not going to be fruitful in the future, but anything difficult will be fruitful for you and will help you in some certain way. So I certainly agree with all those points.
Absolutely.
Now, it's often said that fear is associated with the perception of failure in a certain task. There's always that, like we said, the fear of the unknown as far as you taking on a new project, a new role, whatever the task might be. It's always surrounded by the perception of failure. How do you have a certain example of a time in which you had failed in your career, whether it be early on or recent, and how did you handle that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing with, failure is embracing the mistake and learning from it immediately. And so something that has happened to me, to be honest with you, in several roles is I love human resources. I love implementing and executing. However, for strength finders, ideation is in my top 10 strengths. I love thinking of new ideas, which can be a problem when you're an HR director and you have the ability to implement new ideas. Because what happens is I say, I want to do this, we need this. And I commit to, too many projects. Mm-hmm. And so, I can think of a recent role in which I was in, and, my performance metrics were measured, and part of those were implementing and executing new programs. And so, I was so excited of my ideation about all these great ideas that I had that I wanted to accomplish. So I committed and helped develop this really lofty set of goals. And then what happens in any human resources job, in any management or leadership position, you always need to cut yourself leave a little bit of slack in your workload capacity, because people issues inevitably arise, right? People concerns, questions, situations. So I committed to probably 5 projects that maybe it should have been 2 to 3, and we ended up having just a significant amount of people-related issues, investigations, things like this, performance issues. And I was not able to execute on those things. And, so looking at my performance for that year, it was not where I would like it to be on paper. I committed to all these things. I've only made, 2 out of 5 happen. I'm halfway through another one. And the other 2, I've really just had a few meetings about it. I didn't make any meaningful progress on it. So sitting down and having that conversation with my supervisor, who understood, right? But it was a lesson that I learned I'm not saying don't shoot for the stars. You need to shoot for the stars, but you need to be realistic, and you need to consider your full range of responsibilities when you are planning, and not just the ones that interest you and excite you. You can't always chase the sparklies, right? Something, ooh, shiny, and I want to chase it. You can't always do that. You have to prioritize. So how I've challenged myself to learn from that is in the future, when I was setting goals for the year, I looked at all the projects I wanted to do, and then I looked at, I estimated a potential timeline for each and prioritized them. So I was able to narrow down the list. Okay, 5 to 7, that's not reasonable. Shoot for 2 to 4, because there are other things that come up. There are other things that happen. And, so I did that. I also learned, hey, get a lot better in execution. So I live and breathe by an app called Todoist, and I can make folders for each one of my projects, and I can break them out into tasks. I'm a big fan of timelines on spreadsheets and putting a little X once I accomplish something. Todoist, you check it off and it disappears, but then you get a daily report of all that you've got done. And I've also really learned you have to be vigilant with your calendar. And so, in the workplace, it depends on what operating system you use, but Microsoft Outlook or Google or whatever, but you schedule time for your projects. And if you don't schedule it, no one will make sure it happens for you. And you're being held accountable to those projects. And so, twice a week, put on a 2 or 3 hour block, uninterrupted project time. And unless it's absolutely a fire, right, that's going on that you need to put out, you make sure you take that time and work on your projects. Because in every job that you will ever take, there's kind of 2 positions. One, you're kind of playing offense and defense, right? Let's go with the football analogy again. Go Pittsburgh Steelers. We don't have to talk about it. We know Austin's a Browns fan, and this
we won't talk about that dumpster fire.
Okay. Okay. But in every role, you're kind of playing offense and defense, right? And as defense, you're handling all these issues that come up every day, right? You're blocking and tackling. That's what you're doing. But you also will have an offensive role where you need to move the ball down the field. And so as HR director, you're not just taking care of all these performance issues and open enrollment and, answering all these questions. You're also, hey, we need to look at, recruiting more diverse faculty and staff. Hey, look, we need to, build some kind of engagement program. We need to move the needle on our culture somewhere. And those are projects that move the ball down the field and help the organization in the long run. You can't just show up, right, and block and tackle. You've got to do both. And so you need to be vigilant with your time so you can do both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure as an HR manager, it's very difficult to find the balance between not just recruiting the best talent in order to get the job done, but also finding the balance in who is going to not only just get this job done, but who's going to mesh with our company well. Because in an instance like with the football analogy, there's a lot of examples of football teams that are great on paper. Like you get the most talented people, have the greatest resumes. But yet when it comes down to the locker room situations and the chemistry between all these other integral parts, it all seems to fall apart.
Yeah.
And then there's other times where there's teams that are very inspirational, but yet they're not very good at doing what they do because their talent's not adequate.
Yeah.
So I believe that was a very tough challenge for you as the coordinator to find that balance between the two sides.
Absolutely. And I think in regards to, recruiting and what companies are looking for, I think there's a lot of, what HR people are looking for when they interview you. There's a lot of analogies you can pull from football. But I think that in and of itself is a big one, is you want someone that's able to do the tactical, the routine, tasks that are every day. But you also always need someone that's looking and trying to move that ball down the field, trying to progress the organization, trying to grow it, trying to make it better in whatever way they can, right? Mm-hmm. You want someone who wants to win, and not just for themselves, but for the company. And so, I've been fortunate that I am always that person, but what I learned early on is that you have to be vigilant and assessing yourself, being aware, am I moving the ball down the field as well as am I blocking and tackling? And time management, prioritization, delegation, finding and hiring the right talent, all of those things are a piece of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, time management is something I'm personally learning myself due to all the things I've been taking on, internships, projects, tests, you name it. It's been something that it's been growing pains for me. It's been times where I've been stressed. It's been hard to manage it, but yet at the same time, I even told my grandparents, I'm like, listen, I know I'm stressed right now, but in the end, I'm going to be better for it. Mm-hmm. And I believe our listeners also will agree with that as they go through this progress of learning and growing and how these things are shaping themselves. It's all meant for their good, because in the end, you'll be a much better person for it. So there's definitely something to take away from that.
Absolutely. And I think the highest performing people usually have a pretty good grasp on time management. So they're ruthless in their prioritization and very diligent in how they are productive. But you also need time for yourself too.
Right. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, recently, as you remember, there was an article that we saw on Forbes that I had shared with you regarding a quote that someone stated. And there, in this quote, that they stated that there is an acronym for fear that they described as false evidence appearing real. Do you personally agree with that statement?
Yes, I love that article. Thank you for sharing. I love your LinkedIn game, Austin. I got to tell you, you really share some good content. I do agree with that statement 100%. False evidence appearing real, and I think that's kind of aligned with my personal definition of fear. Is I kind of am uncertainty appearing like false evidence that then appears unreal. But I think I think that's pretty wise. It reminds me of, there is an author and a very powerful speaker. Her name's Brené Brown, and she writes a lot of books on vulnerability and leadership. She's a researcher, and she has a whole concept of when you don't know something, you kind of write your own story, right? And so that story is, it is often wrong. And so, learn the advice she shares that I think is great and really aligns with this statement is learn when you're afraid and you're considering some idea that's fearful, some job that's fearful, some project that you're afraid of, you're concerned with, learn to kind of dissect those fears and ask yourself, what story am I writing? What story am I telling myself? Because the story I'm telling myself is, maybe I'm not good enough for this job. The story I'm telling myself might be, I'm not talented enough to solve this problem at work. The story I'm telling myself is, I'm going to fail, But really, a lot of times that story's wrong. That's your fear. That's the false evidence or lack of evidence, right? Working against you and playing games in your mind. So you need to embrace, look, the story I'm telling myself is probably wrong. I need to be a big girl, big boy, right? Face my fear, understand that this is uncomfortable. I will figure it out, and I'll move on. I love that statement. False evidence appearing real.
Absolutely. It certainly spoke to me also because, people think that fear is, they're like, oh, this is something that could happen. It's like, but is it going to happen? Is there 100% certainty?
Yeah.
Because it's often just something that we perceive as a possibility when in actuality it's maybe like a 0.2% chance of it happening. So
exactly. And that's the story I'm telling myself is that I'm going to start, I'm going to fail, I'll get whatever, I'll get in trouble, I won't do a good job. But again, like you said, what are the chances of that really happening? And so when you phrase things, or when you remember false evidence appearing real, or when you phrase things like, what story am I telling myself? What story am I writing here? It'll help you remember, look, you don't know. You don't know yet, so try, right? Relax. Stop writing that story.
Yeah, there's also an old saying that states that people who never fail don't ever try anything. So that's certainly something to keep in mind.
That's absolutely right, and I love, I love stories of famous failures. You know how many recipes Colonel Sanders tried, how many times he got turned down before, KFC is a household name. How many times Walt Disney went bankrupt before Disney is used, the word Disney is, a brand, right, that is probably one of the most recognized brands in the world. So many failures. Steve Jobs, right? Fired from Apple, left, started Pixar, hired back at Apple. So, it feels good to kind of understand, look, every single person has failed. I have failed about probably 87 times today, and it is 12:43. So, you just got to get back up there and have some grit and try again and learn.
Absolutely. Now, before our time concludes for today, what would be one key piece of evidence you would like to provide to our listening audience for facing or even embracing their career-related fears in the time going forward?
Yeah. So, I have so many, and I'm always happy to talk to people, about and give career advice. Students, I love that. I would say, regarding facing careers, I don't want to say something general like, like follow your heart, follow your gut. I think it's perfectly fine, and I would actually recommend being deliberate in your decisions regarding career. But I would say, something that I did early on that I think has really helped me, and is I figured out my thread, I guess. I knew I loved HR. And look, I've taken jobs in HR, and then I had this teaching position, right, opportunity, and I said, that's really weird. That'll look weird on my resume. That's a really weird pivot on my jungle gym, right? But I took it, and I've been able to be, immersed in human resources and help develop future HR leaders every day of my position here. And I kind of found my thread is not only HR, but also teaching. In every role I've ever had, HR role, I've always kind of, played the coach, developed professional development programs, either facilitated, coordinated, or served as a mentor in some sort of mentorship program or capacity. So my threads are kind of HR and teaching. And I think it's really helpful if people reflect and say, what really just, it's not going to be, I want to be a marketing analyst. That's not your thread. But maybe your thread is kind of, something like, I love helping brands develop awareness. Or maybe your thread is sports and competition, and, or maybe your thread is media and technology in some way. And that will really help guide your career. If you're looking at a marketing analyst position in a tech company, or, maybe you want to move over to operations in some highly advanced, big box kind of corporate structure, either way, they're going to both be related to technology. And that helps you make really tough career decisions that, that may take you from changing industries, changing paths. But you're going to be happy because you're following that thing that kind of helps your heart sing, right? Mm-hmm. So that would be my advice, is reflect, experience as much as you can, so you can kind of identify these few threads that you're going to stay related to, tangentially at least, throughout your entire career. And it'll help you be so much more comfortable in facing those fears.
Absolutely. I really like that. That's very good advice. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, our time has come to an end for today's episode. We would like to graciously thank Gabby once again for spending her precious time with us on the show today. We certainly enjoyed hearing your personal experiences and the lessons learned from failures in your career. The members of the IUK HRSA would like to thank you all for tuning into this episode of the Leadership and Business Podcast. We absolutely hope that today's episode has provided you all with the tools and confidence to conquer the fears in your own personal lives as well as your careers. We truly look forward to having you all join us on the next episode of Storytime, Experiences and Lessons from IUK's own beloved faculty.